Welcome back to Speak Out. I'm your host, Christine Jurgen, and today's guest is Laura Becker, who is an artist, but she is also, interestingly, a detransitioner who is speaking out on the harms of transition, especially as it relates to children. Laura, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to spread some awareness about detransition.
I am too, because I think this is something that is not talked about a ton. We, obviously see the indoctrination and the gender ideology that's being pushed onto our children and adults even in today's day and age. But a lot of times you don't really hear the story about detransitioners. And I think it's important to amplify voices like yours because these are stories that need to be heard. So for anybody who doesn't know who you are, give me a little bit of background on Laura, the person, and then we'll dive into a little bit of your story.
Right. So I am a detransitioner, meaning I'm a woman that went through medicalization and adopted a trans identity and then later accepted biological reality. I'm now just a normal woman, but I am a trauma survivor of the trans cult and then also some childhood trauma. So I speak out publicly. I do events, internationally. I'm also a writer. I have a memoir going to be released this year, Surviving the Trans Myth. So I'm basically writing and speaking constantly on the gender topic and then getting deeper into the root causes. I consult with parents. I do coaching. I do consultation for parents who have trans identified kids. So I am way too versed in the gender topic, but it's because I did survive it. And a lot of people say that this isn't happening or that if it is happening, it's a good thing and it's progressive. And so I'm kind of here to expose the myths behind the trans movement and then to offer some solutions and awareness of how families and culture can inculcate itself against this.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you were young, did you always have some sort of insight? Because I hear this a lot of like, it's not a lifestyle that we choose. These children at infancy or toddlerhood should or already know kind of what their gender is, and we should be trusting them to express it. Or is this something that came later due to something else? When did this kind of start happening?
For me or
Yeah,
in
yeah.
society? Okay. Yeah, so for me, I've always been a quirky kid. I'm an artist. I'm a writer. I'm kind of a free spirit. So I've always been nonconforming and I was a tomboy. I was wearing boys' clothes, was not interested in anything to do with what we might call performative femininity. I was, just a very imaginative kid. And when you're imaginative, you get into abstract ideas. And so, unfortunately, in the culture right now, there's some postmodernist theorists, basically. Postmodernism is a deconstructionist philosophy. So it says anything that is normal, anything that is functional or working, that is oppressive. And so that's what it means to be queer. Queer does not mean anymore just being gay or lesbian as it was in the 80s or 90s. Queer actually means we are fighting to destroy what is normal. We're queering something, we're inverting normalcy. And it's mostly to spark a revolution, political revolution. Of course, as a kid, I don't know any of that stuff. I'm just a quirky kid who is nonconforming. And so I was learning about this ideology in my high school. I was learning about this ideology on social media websites, and other quirky artistic kids were talking about this. And I was thinking, oh, well, that sounds like me. This idea of being non-binary, queer, sounds exactly like me. I'm kind of rebellious. I am unconventional, outside the box. And so I started thinking, okay, maybe I'm actually meant to be a man. Maybe I'm not meant to be a girl because I don't relate to these stereotypes about femininity. And I did have some trauma in my history. There was parental abuse from my father, psychological, verbal, and emotional abuse. And that caused me to have very severe self-esteem issues. I was very depressed. I was struggling with suicide ideation. And so I had many vulnerabilities that led me to reject myself and reject my own reality because it was so painful. And then at the same time, this ideology was saying if you feel uncomfortable as yourself and you're disassociating from your body and you hate yourself, that is actually proof that you are trans. And therefore, if you're trans, that's good, that's valid, that's normal, right? So it's an inversion of what actually is real, what is normal. What was real was very painful for me, right? I was a traumatized kid. I didn't want to be an abused girl. I wanted to be happy, and I was struggling to do that. But instead of being able to receive help for that and the mental health issues I had, I was told by the ideology, which was then validated by therapists. It was validated by my pediatrician. It was validated by psychiatrists. And then it was validated by a surgeon. And I ended up taking testosterone at 19, and that caused a mental breakdown. I developed facial hair. My voice was permanently lowered, severe acne, all these sort of mood disturbances. And then at the age of 20, I had my breast cut off because I thought that is what you did. I thought that's how it worked, that the ideology said that if you are trans, then the only cure for that is to accept yourself and to have this weird pride that's actually an inversion of reality. Because how prideful is it to, well, I suppose it's very hubristic, right? To then destroy your own body, you know. It's extremely dark. I would say it is evil. I would say it's in spiritual terms, it's satanic, because you are destroying a healthy, beautiful body that's really just still developing. I was only 20, so I, not even old enough to drink alcohol or, to really understand, the consequences permanently. And so that was a kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but those are some of the beliefs that I was holding at the time.
Yeah. So you're right. It is completely sad, and I would say completely demonic, because these are healthy bodies, and maybe something's going on that's deeper that we obviously need to be addressing 100%. Like, you have things that have gone on in your past. I notice a lot. I don't know if you notice a lot, because obviously you were at one time identifying as trans, and I'm sure plenty of trans communities, and talking to a lot of people, that there is a lot of abuse that you see with people who identify that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to just return to common sense that people who experience any type of abuse, whether it be sexual abuse, psychological abuse, or, even spiritual abuse for some of these families, these kids and young adults, they don't have a stable sense of self. And
Yeah.
the trans identity says that, oh, if you don't have a stable sense of self, then that's actually proof that you're trans. And so it's really evil, because it's saying to the most vulnerable members of society that the only way to love themselves is to actually destroy themselves. And it just reinforces the abuse that they've experienced. And because abuse
Interesting.
is normal to them, they think, oh, well, this is the only path for me.
Yeah. So, okay. So obviously this idea is not like bred in us from a young age. Like, if I go tell my 5-year-old, you can transition to a boy, she'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, she doesn't think that way. She doesn't know that. I would have to put that idea in her head for her to think that. Now, obviously, there's imagination. She might tell me she's a unicorn one day, a dinosaur another day, something along those lines, as every parent experiences their child pretending or dressing up or doing other things. That's just, exploratory, having fun as a kid, being adventurous. But obviously, this idea for you came from somewhere. Like, where did you start hearing this idea and believing it? Was it friends? Was it family? Was it social media, TV? How did you even think, oh, like, this is a thing, and maybe I actually could be a boy?
Right. So you're absolutely correct that this is a manufactured belief. There's no scientific basis for someone, just being born in the wrong body or being meant. No one is ever destined for cosmetic surgery. Like, there's no predestination for
I love
that.
that. Yeah.
Um, so I started learning about it on Tumblr, on websites where, there was other kind of quirky, socially awkward girls that were trying to fit in. And, for some historical context, this didn't just pop up in, the mid 2010s. This was coming for a long time. It goes back to these academics, these very far leftist Marxist academics who were writing this theory to deconstruct norms in a way to promote a Marxist revolution. This goes back, and we hear gender theorists like Judith Butler, for instance, who's saying that gender is always performative. And, she's a big pusher of the trans industry. So this was being taught in academics by these very fringe theorists. And then this was trickling down into the colleges, trickling down into the K-12 schools. And eventually this spread into LGBT organizations, where after the gay rights movement was very successful in the West and gay marriage was legalized, all of these organizations had all these funds that they wanted to keep going. And so they turned to this very small population of people who were mostly drag queens. These were mostly gay men who were transvestites, which means to wear opposite sex clothing. They weren't actually having gender dysphoria. They were just gay. Or men who had fetishes and they were sexually aroused by the thought of themselves as women. These were very fringe, but there was money to be made, and they linked up perfectly with pharma, with prescribing people these treatments, and there was a big money maker for them. And it was a big political angle because in the woke movement, oppression is considered currency. So the more disenfranchised you are as a population, if you're trans, if you're gay, if you're black, then you have more social credit, and you can use that to emotionally manipulate people into doing whatever you want. So that's why it got on Tumblr for reference. But by the time that I found it and all these other kids found it, we just think, oh, this is normal. We're being taught this is the same as being gay, or, being in a wheelchair, or this is just how you're born and you should accept it. When in reality, it was completely manufactured by these Marxist theorists. So it's insidious, and social media is one of the biggest pushers of it. But unfortunately, it's being taught in our schools, and it's being taught in our HR departments, and pretty much everywhere you can think. Companies have latched onto it because it's a moneymaker and it looks good, in a shallow way.
So, okay, there was something that I heard in another interview that you did where you were talking about when you went to go talk to a doctor about, what I'm not exactly sure what the original appointment was about, but when it came to having a double mastectomy, the doctor only met with you for about 15 minutes. Is that true?
Yes, that is true.
It's horrifying.
I had a consultation with a plastic surgeon because I was looking for a double mastectomy, and he was specializing in, of course, this is the way that he could make money. He had turned his general plastic surgery practice into just double mastectomy, even for girls as young as 16. So he didn't really think that we were boys. He was just trying to make money. And I went in there as a very suicidal, very messed up person. And he met with me for 15 minutes. And in the consult notes that I found, all he wrote down was, Laura is a very pleasant 20-year-old female, and I've approved her for surgery. So like right there, he's saying, this is a girl. Oh, and she's pleasant, it's just sickening to read that, because obviously I am permanently, sexually disfigured. There's no other way to put it. Like people call it medical mutilation for a reason. I mean, I
Yeah.
will never have a normal female body, and I'm one of the lucky ones compared to some people, who have their reproductive organs removed and things like that.
That it's devastating for me to think about. When I was doing some research on you, I was just listening to some of the things that you were talking about in some different interviews and stuff, and I found myself like tearing up, knowing, like, obviously you've woken up to the reality of all of this, but knowing there are kids out there right now who are being inundated and indoctrinated with this kind of ideology, who just need love, or they just need someone to tell them that, they're okay the way they are. Maybe they feel like a little bit of an outcast, or they don't have a ton of friends, or, whatever it is. Maybe they've been through some abuse. But I feel like now a lot of people want to latch on to something because, and this probably goes back to all of the Marxism and stuff, and you are probably far more educated on that than I am. But it goes back to the fact that if you are a straight white person, almost you're demonized. So everybody wants to identify as something else, whether that's, I've seen people go as far as like, I want to identify as being disabled and,
Hmm.
just get in a wheelchair, or I want to be trans, or now I'm, I don't even know what all the different things are that you can identify as now. There's so many of them, or gay or lesbian. And half the time, they're not even any of those things. They just want to identify as something because if they don't identify, then they're kind of the oppressor. They have something wrong with them. Just like you mentioned, anything that is like traditional is bad. And so I'm seeing a lot of that as these kids want to have this identity just to be accepted by what a lot of people think is like the new normal. Is that kind of, am I hitting the nail on the head, or am I just like seeing something that's not there?
No, that's absolutely what's happening. And, we can think about it. It makes perfect sense, right? When you are a kid, you have a high imagination and you are meant to play with things. You're meant to put on different roles. You're meant to put on costumes. Especially during adolescence, we are designed to try on different roles and experiment with things and take risks in a way we haven't before because
Sure.
we're learning where the boundaries are. We're learning what is the limit of reality. We're reality testing. And so we're figuring out, oh, is am I motivated to, date a girl or date a boy? Am I motivated to do this for my career? Am I good at this? Am I bad at this? We're meant to be trying on these different personas, and then we're meant to gain skills to then be able to become productive members of society and whatever where our gifts are. But these kids are being foreclosed that opportunity because they're trying on an option using their imagination and doing what is normal and appropriate, but the adults are not being the adults in the room, and the adults are saying, yes, this imaginative identity that you have is actually who you are, and it forecloses their ability to actually develop normally. Then, obviously, if you add a puberty suppressant to that, like a puberty blocker, it will literally stunt their body and brain development as well. And so it is extremely predatory because these kids are trying to grow up, but the adults are actually preventing them from doing
Wait,
that.
hang on. So I knew that it stopped their puberty in ways, and sometimes things have been irreversible, but it also stops their brain development.
I mean, think about it, right? Like the body isn't the only thing that's growing. Like the arms and legs aren't just getting longer. The brain is getting more sophisticated. They're developing more critical thinking skills. Their brain matter is growing, and more neural pathways are forming. So if you stop one area of the body, you can't just stop growth in just one area. It's stunting the whole thing.
That's so ideal for them because obviously the brain doesn't start or stop developing until 25 years old. So you kind of leave them in this forever adolescent state where they continue to think this. And we know that a lot of times it's people who are younger than 18, and then they kind of grow out of this ideology when they get older, like, oh no, in your, like, kind of in your case, I actually do think that I am a female. I don't think that I'm a male. So like, I'm a parent. I have a almost 17-year-old. I have an 8-year-old. I have a 5-year-old. My younger two, I homeschool because I try to protect them from pretty much anything and everything that I possibly can. My son goes to a private school and has been in public schools. What should parents be looking out for? What areas, obviously we know social media, but what are some other areas that this ideology is targeting our kids that parents might not know about, or maybe we do, but we need to be more aware about?
So I think what parents need to know is that this ideology has spread to every possible institution, and generally on the left side of things, it's basically considered par for the course. And so it's pretty much you have to not only look out for it, but you have to expect it because it's already there. And if you think it's not
Right.
there, you're probably missing some of the signs. Like, for instance, a lot of parents, they think, oh, well, it's okay if my kid is using different pronouns or adopting a non-binary gender identity, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. But the reality is that by that point, that kid is already psychologically manipulated and getting sucked into a cult. Like, it's a body modification cult, and the outcome of it is mutilation and, in some cases, sterilization and permanent disfigurement of sexual function. So it's not just a social transition as in, oh, this is just kind of fine if they adopt this identity. You don't want any social transition. You don't want to ever use their pronouns. You don't want to ever validate a lie that there's something wrong with them or that they're not the sex that they are. Anything that you give an inch on in that area is going to lead them to more confusion, because we all know this. This is very traditional wisdom that kids need boundaries. In fact, we all do. Adults especially need boundaries sometimes. I know I do. But we need boundaries to be able to understand a healthy and productive way to live. And if you're an adult and you're being permissive to a child and you're saying, oh yeah, that's fine if you want to use those pronouns, it's not that big of a deal. At least you're not asking to, have hormones. That's not okay. You can't be permissive in any way when it comes to the ideology, because there are institutions that are set up just to get your kid access to these drugs, to these surgeries. And if you give them any permission that that's okay, or that you support that, or you don't make a very clear and assertive stance that you do not agree with that, then that kid is going to feel free and empowered to be self-destructive.
Yeah, so we have, as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking of the different ways like kids can come across this ideology, and obviously it's pretty much everywhere these days. And hopefully sanity is starting to return to our country. But I'm thinking like video games. There's a lot of video games that parents don't know that there's like chat rooms and there's ways that people can get a hold of your children. Obviously, social media, school. I remember we were at a charter school in Colorado, and a principal, this didn't happen to my child, something happened where one kid was making fun of another kid and called that kid gay. And so the kid who called somebody gay, the principal pulled them into his office, shut the door, and I guess assumed it was projection and was like, it's okay if you're gay. And like, to me, that's not a conversation that a principal needs to be having with a 12-year-old child without a parent present, or period in general, to me, but obviously, especially without a parent present. So we know like this ideology can come through schools, whether it's a teacher or a principal or another student. I'm thinking like comprehensive sex ed. What are your thoughts on comprehensive sex ed? Because I feel like today's day and age, it's just a way to promote this ideology in a lot of ways, get kids sexually active, and kind of like tear down, again, any sense of normalcy or tradition.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of comprehensive sex ed in its current form because it is ideologically captured. It's very biased. It encourages secretism from parents. It diminishes parental authority because like in an ideal world, we would be able to have kids have awareness of sex and be able to be productive. But that's just not the reality that we're living in with these curricula. And even if it's not sex ed, I mean, this is, if you look at a math book or a textbook of any kind, at this point, the trans propaganda is in there because it's mandated by some of these social emotional learning programs where, I'm a huge therapy enjoyer and of all that kind of psychological stuff. But they trick people by putting in, with mindfulness and with gratitude and with all these nice concepts, they'll then sneak in, trans identity. Like they'll sneak it in under that, and then it's mandated that it be included in a math equation. Like, you have to really pay attention because you can't at this point trust the schools to be the way that they used to be. And at this point, a lot of young people are, so overwhelmingly most teachers are going to be left leaning, and because the left is so strongly promotes this, there's a really good chance that the left teachers are going to be acting in an activist manner, and therapists are going to be acting as activists. So they're not just being trained to teach math and reading, they are being trained to teach about DEI. They are being trained to teach about queer theory. And they feel that they basically feel entitlement to indoctrinate your kids because they have some kind of personal or political agenda. So you have to understand that you have to expect that this is in there and be really vigilant about every single adult that you let your child interact with, especially if it's in a position of authority like a teacher, a social worker, or a therapist or a pediatrician.
Yeah, it's so intriguing to me because I think a lot of parents end up being hands off in a lot of ways when it comes to schools, especially like I find here, I live in Alabama now, used to live in Colorado. And, you know, a lot of people are traditionally conservative here. And they think that just because they're in a conservative state that things aren't happening, but they are. I've got experiences of different parents who send their kids to public school of things happening. For instance, a teacher, I've shared this on the podcast before, at some point in time, told a girl who said only girls have periods. And the teacher said, well, that's just your opinion. Obviously, we know that that's not true. And people, you know, think that I'm crazy when I say that it's happening. They're like, no, that doesn't happen in Alabama. Like, we don't do that. I'm like, but it is. And you've closed your eyes so much that you're not seeing it. But it's not always that blatant. Sometimes, like you said, it's in a math book and you see like they, them and a word problem. And but a lot of parents aren't like scouring math books, and there might be some really well-meaning teachers who aren't trying to indoctrinate kids that way, but they don't have any control over the curriculum that's going to be used in the classroom a lot of times. So sometimes, and then even further, there's a lot of people who are on school boards who don't pay attention to the curriculum that's being pushed in. They're not devouring the curriculum and looking at it and trying to protect kids in these ways. A lot of school boards are a political ladder to the next elected position that they want to have. So to me, I find more people are on school boards not to actually protect children and to promote academia, but to actually climb their own ladder to professional success. So I want parents to obviously like be paying attention. If your kids have social media, if they have phones, like look at that stuff, look at the curriculum that your kids are learning. I think all of that's really important. Something that we haven't touched on regarding schools is like there's like school therapy now and counselors. And you mentioned that they teach kids to keep secrets from their parents. And I've noticed that a lot of these times it seems very innocent. Like if your child is having issues, they can call this phone number and schools pass out this phone number. And a lot of times, you know, whether they're suicidal or something along those lines, it is all gender affirming type things that you're going to hear on the other end of that call. There have been some moms who've like called and kind of, you know, investigated, so to speak, and asked questions. And they found that it was like totally like pushing a leftist agenda and this woke gender ideology. And so I think that parents need to know about that. I don't think that I've seen one that is just like genuine therapy that would actually alert parents. If you see a phone number, I'd say, do not let your kids have that phone number. Would you agree?
I fully agree. And on that
Yeah.
point, I would also stress the strong importance of having safe adult mentors in your child's life, because we're talking
Yeah.
about all these things that we need to keep our children away from, but anything that we remove from a child's life, we need to replace that with something that is going to be productive, that is going to be
Mm.
effective. So I understand that kids, when they're going through adolescence, they're individuating from their parents. They're normally, you know, they're detaching a bit, and that's normal. But if we don't give them other options of safe adults that they can go to who are not going to affirm their delusion, then they are going to feel like the only option they have are to call that number or to talk to someone on the internet. So always
Yeah.
keep in mind that you want a strong community of adult mentors in your child's life, an aunt, an uncle, a neighbor, a friend, someone at church, someone that your kid can go to if they don't feel safe for whatever reason going to you. Otherwise, they're going to go to some stranger on the internet.
Totally. No, you're completely right. And that's super valid. So as a detransitioner, I want to talk about something else. We have maybe slightly differing views on the life issue, which we're not going to totally jump in here. I know we do probably have some similarities and then some differences. But as a detransitioner, I want to talk about Planned Parenthood because they have become the number one supplier of gender therapy care. And I read that they don't even require children to go to any sort of therapy for handing out hormones.
Yeah, Planned Parenthood is a very evil organization for a number of reasons, but it's true that you can just call at any age, at any demographic, you can just call and get hormones in like a 15 to 30-minute appointment. And I have known a lot of detransitioners and friends of mine that that's how they got hormones. They just went to Planned Parenthood. They got it for free or very low cost.
Like, what is their goal, do you think, with handing out these hormones for free?
I think a lot of their goal is to pat themselves on the back and promote that kind of activist, revolutionary sentiment that, oh, these are women or people that are disenfranchised and I'm the savior and I'm going to help them and I'm going to give them this. I think a lot of it is psychologically motivated from an entitlement, from a narcissistic view that they really believe that they're doing the right thing. The same as handing out abortions or handing out condoms or whatever it is that their birth control they're handing out. I think they also definitely will get some sort of, subsidization from the government, right? For whatever work that they're doing. So the more that they give out, the better it looks for them from a financial point of view. I think most of it though is that activist sentiment that, oh, who's thinking of the poor women that just need, to get an abortion or that just need to, transition. No one else is helping them, but I can help them. So whoever that person is on that phone call, they're probably thinking that they're saving that person's life. And when you understand it like that, it's just that the road to hell is paved with good intentions sort of thing.
Yeah. So I'm curious your thoughts. There's been a lot of calls to defund Planned Parenthood. Are you on board to defund Planned Parenthood?
Oh yeah, I fully want to defund any institution whatsoever that's promoting child abuse.
So, okay, if there's something that parents could do from an early age to kind of promote security in their children and who they are. I'm a Christian, and so obviously, I find my identity and I tell my children to find their identity in who God says that they are. They find their identity in Christ. And I think that provides a really solid foundation for them. But I know there's some people who may be listening who aren't religious. I don't know that are you religious or
I'm
Christian?
spiritual, but
Okay.
I appreciate Christianity quite a bit.
Sure. So, what would you say that parents should do from an early age to kind of just provide that foundation for kids so they're not constantly looking elsewhere?
That's a really good question. And I feel like, a large part of my work is talking about the very broad and existential angle of the human condition of what can we actually do to solve distress. Because all of these forms of distress, whether they be gender or depression or loneliness or whatever it is, a lot of it has the same foundation, which is a lack of connection. Because if we don't have a connection to other human beings who are like us and who give us love and who give us, empower us to be a better version of ourselves, then we're going to be completely disillusioned. And so I think the best thing that parents can do for their kids is to practice an assertive parenting style where it's not, tyrannical and it's not permissive, because either one will create issues in a child where they feel like they're not in control of themselves. If a child doesn't feel that they have some amount of power within themselves to make their own decisions and have autonomy that, leads them to make critical thinking decisions, they're going to rely on people that are false authority figures. They're going to have a fractured identity because they feel disempowered and they don't know how to make good decisions. They're going to get themselves into a lot of trouble and feel like they don't know how to problem solve their way out. So the best thing you can do is to give your child a strong combination of love and attunement and physical touch, but also boundaries. Also set strong limits that benefit the child's well-being, because if you have love without boundaries, that's permissiveness that's going to lead to a weak identity, And if you have boundaries without enough love and affection, you're going to create a child that's cold, which is another form of weakness, because then they cannot, form healthy relationships with other people.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Okay, as parents, we're told if you turn on the news or anything these days and age, or this day and age, if you have a child who's questioning their gender identity, you better let them transition or they're going to commit suicide. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so that's one of the biggest myths that I discuss in my the Surviving the Trans Myth book. It's one of the biggest myth is that this is going to lead to suicide if you don't have cosmetic surgery, essentially. And once you kind of frame it like that in your mind, a lot of the worry kind of melts away because you just realize how absurd it is because no one needs, unless you're like a severe burn victim, you don't need cosmetic surgery to live. And I understand it emotionally manipulates on a parent's worst fear, which is losing their child. I think that parents need to take a step back and do a reality check with themselves and say, okay, that is my worst fear, but how much am I letting this false anxiety get to me and impact my parenting with my child? I consult with parents, and a lot of the parents that I see, they are very, very anxious. They're very high strung. And I often have to kind of gently push back on them and say, hey, you're kind of catastrophizing right now. Is your child actually going to kill themselves if they don't get what they want? You're not going to just give a child a cookie because they say they're going to kill themselves. You obviously, don't just give a child whatever they want because of a threat. You are the parent, you know what's best, and you have to model that for your kids, which means being strong within your own self, finding power within yourself to combat your own anxiety or fear or doubt or shame around whatever it is. Maybe you have shame about your body and your kids picking up on that unconsciously. So I would encourage parents, make sure that you are modeling the behaviors to your kids that you want to see them portray or exhibit, I should say. If you're portraying a behavior that's weak and anxious and you're doubting and you're ambivalent and you're like, oh, I don't know, maybe, this would be good, your kid isn't going to feel secure. You have to make sure to say, hey, honey, I'm really glad that you're telling me that you're confused. It's very normal to be confused. Here are some options for some things that we could try to do to figure out, if you'd like this activity or maybe you'd like to read this book or something like that. But you have to be strong yourself. And I think that's missed a lot of the time because there are so many adults, including parents, that are very scared and they're depressed. So a lot of this starts with the parents because their kid is going to be weakened if you are not a strong parent yourself.
Does transitioning even actually reduce the rate of suicide among people who are identifying in this way?
So we don't have a lot of good research, even though, people claim that it does. We actually really don't have much research. The limited research that we have shows that there might be a temporary decrease. I view it as a placebo effect because think about it. You just had this major, transformative trauma basically. And now you're thinking, oh, I finally reached my goal. You're getting dopamine because you've reached this goal and you're thinking, oh, okay, I've solved the problem. So you might have a little bit of a peak of positive emotion for a few months or a year or so, because you're living in this fantasy world. But soon enough, you're going to actually become more depressed and more suicidal because, of course, you have physical health problems now. You have complications from the surgery. You're not actually living in alignment with reality, and that does catch up to you.
Yeah.
So the data we have shows that it actually increases suicidality over the long term.
Interesting. And that makes sense to me because obviously life is long. Something that happens like right after you transition, you're going to be living in a whole new world that you're just trying to get used to right away and probably healing from whatever surgery it is that you had. I find this with the abortion issue too. A lot of women, say, well, I had an abortion. I don't regret it right away. But, maybe 10 years later, 15 years later. And a lot of times they do those studies for the women who will do them. A lot of women actually drop out of the studies because they don't want to do them anymore. But they'll do the studies like right after. Like, did you experience any relief? Okay, sure. But like, what about in a month or in a year or in 10 years or 20, 30 years. I have 70-year-olds sometimes who contact me, and I would imagine it's the same when it comes to transitioning of, oh, do you feel good? You just got out of surgery. You're still all doped up on all this medication. You feel great. All right, cool. Well, let's put that down as a statistic. When in reality, when that all wears off and they go back to their normal everyday life, they're probably still just as confused. At least that's my thought process. And when you were speaking, you were saying something about kids feeling, or kind of like parents portraying what they want their kids to see. And I was just thinking in my head, like if I'm saying, oh, I'm overweight, or I don't like the way I look this way, or, a lot of women have cosmetic surgery, whether that's filler or Botox or any of those things. I don't do those things. I'm too crunchy for them, but also like I don't want to pay for it either. Like if I see a wrinkle, sure, I'd love for that wrinkle to go away, but I'm not going to pay for that to go away because that's what's natural. But I think about my kids, even just when I'm putting on makeup, like my daughters, like, why are you putting on mascara? And in my mind, I'm like, oh, well, I just want to enhance my features a little bit. But then it got me thinking about makeup and cosmetic surgery and liposuction and all these things that we do. And I wonder if that also is kind of like opening a door to this idea that you're not perfect the way that God made you, and that there's something wrong with you because you want to look like something else. It's just kind of a thought that came in my head.
Yeah, no, that's a really complicated idea because, beauty is a virtue, and but I think what's important to remember is that it's beauty in relationship to truth, to reality, to health. And, cosmetic alterations or fashion or even makeup can be an addiction. So, it's everything in moderation. I think that it's perfectly fine to show kids that you can put on dresses and you can look pretty and or handsome sometimes, and that's okay, and even it can be a virtuous thing to do, but to then show them, so that's showing them that love, right? But then showing them the boundary and saying, but there's some limits, right? Like if it's harming your health in the long run, then that's not a beautiful thing.
Sure.
And if you're going against God's creation, that's not a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you started to regret things, how did you start to kind of come into this mindset of like, oh crap, I just had my breasts removed, but I think that I actually want to still be a female?
Yeah, so for me, I had a I mean, all of this was traumatic. I mean, it
I
just is, I
imagine.
have PTSD. So, I learned about it in a very extreme way. I was actually debating about killing myself. I mean, I debated about it for many years, but I was lying in bed. I had taken off a semester from college because I didn't know what I was doing with my life. And I was debating, am I going to kill myself or not? And I decided that I would try to live. And if I was going to live, that meant that I needed to take some kind of responsibility in the smallest ways that I could and start to make some changes. So I had a psychological evaluation to kind of determine what is my baseline, functioning? What is there anything else going on? And it turns out that I was diagnosed with PTSD. I was diagnosed with PTSD, not surprising, from the child abuse, but also from the transition itself. And so
Wow.
these practitioners were like, they just saw this traumatized girl and they were like, yeah, you have PTSD from getting the surgery, from having this identity crisis. And it was very surprisingly very easy for me to accept it at that point because my reality had a complete paradigm shift where I went from fighting reality and fighting the abuse and trying to run from it or blaming myself for it, and realizing, oh, this was not my fault at all. This was never about me. This was about the environment I was in. This was about my abuser abusing me. This wasn't actually something wrong with me. And that's what helped me to then realize it was the same thing with the trans stuff. The trans stuff was just a maladaptive coping mechanism for the abuse and the trauma. So then I detransitioned, within a few months because I realized that I was just a traumatized woman and nothing about my life had really changed. I was still the same person and I would always be female. And that acceptance actually brought immense peace because I realized that I could have forgiveness for my female body for just enduring the pain of that abuse and that there was nothing wrong with it that needed to ever be fixed.
So, what are some of the things that you're still living with today after detransitioning that are because of the actual transition?
So I will never have breasts. I have very long scars that, cover most of my chest. I have no real nerve functionality or functionality in my nipples, so I'll never be able to breastfeed. I have no sexual or sensual enjoyment from my body, and that's definitely the hardest thing that I deal with. But my voice was permanently lowered from the testosterone. I have to shave my face every day because I, grow facial hair, and the psychological consequences of it are just a ton of grief. I feel I lost years of my life where I should have been starting to mature and become an adult to being in this cult, and I'll never get those years back. And so the hardest thing psychologically is that I live with developmental delays, in dating and marriage and all these things, and working and everything, because I had to spend so many years in my early 20s and mid 20s. I'm 28 now, healing from all of this, and it's very hard to live with the loss and knowing that it never should have happened, and knowing that you're still struggling to kind of catch up to where you could have been if you had received the love and the boundaries that you needed all along.
Wow. So, okay, when you detransitioned, your friends who were around you, people who've been part of, the LGBTQIA uh, community, did did the community still accept you after you detransitioned?
So I had distanced myself from the community because it really was so toxic. It was very controlling. This is the thing that people don't
Interesting.
understand about the trans community, is that it's only surface level loving and accepting. It's not authentic connection, because a lot of these people are drug addicts. They're just traumatized. They're messed up people. So you think it's all this loving family, and then you get completely ostracized. For a lot of us, we actually were being mistreated in the community already, and then when we had a different belief system or detransition, we were no longer part of the clique of unhealthiness, and so we were ostracized fully. So that's kind of what happened to me. I was very estranged from the community because it wasn't really a community. I didn't feel love there. So when I detransitioned, I did have a couple of my kind of woke friends, renounce me and say that I was a bigot and
Oh,
whatever,
wow.
and say, I don't know how you could ever do this. And but by that point, I was already learning about abuse and stuff, and being like, oh well, this is just manipulative, so I don't need this person in my life.
That's wild to me because it's so much of like, your own lived experience and your life and your truth. But then all of a sudden, if your truth is, I want to detransition, all of a sudden you're like the devil.
Hmm.
I,
Yeah, that's exactly how it is.
I don't, I guess I just don't understand it, but you keep describing it as a cult, but it makes sense. Like you're no longer in the cult if you don't buy into their ideology. And so
Hmm.
now you're an outsider and somehow a bigot. When these people obviously know that you were probably a good person and they were your friend or, quote unquote friend. And then all of a sudden, like you just have a difference of opinion and you're an outsider. I find
Hmm.
that a lot as it relates to being conservative as a whole. And obviously, you have shifted much more conservative. But even in my realm, where I've always kind of been vocal about being conservative, my husband had friends who that he grew up with for years, and because I was vocally conservative, they wanted nothing to do with him anymore. So it's not just the community. I think it's kind of just leftism as a whole. It's like if you have these ideas or you are traditional in any way, shape, or form, you are a bad person, which is absolutely crazy to me. One of the things that we didn't talk about that I'd love to touch on just very briefly is pornography is another way. You've been kind of vocal about that a little bit, that this kind of ideology is getting into our children. We know that today's day and age, by age 11, I think it is, like most kids have been introduced to porn at that age, which is just mind boggling to me. I want to say it's even younger now. I read something that it might even be like 9. And it's everywhere. Like I was on X the other day. I don't know if you saw it, and Kanye West posted pornography, and I'm like, okay, I didn't sign up for that. I'm not even on a porn website. Like, what is going on? And it just showed up, and it wasn't because I even followed him, because I think he's crazy, but other people were sharing, about him, and then somehow my algorithm like popped it up in my face. So like, even if you're not looking for it, it's there, and it's finding our kids, whether that's other kids introducing it to them, an inappropriate adult introducing it to them. But do you find that's another gateway into this whole movement?
Yeah, porn is really damaging, obviously, for so many reasons, but
Yeah.
especially when you have a kid that it doesn't have a secure sexuality, they've never dated, they don't understand how to have a healthy romantic relationship or how to view the opposite sex or even the same sex. And it can be really confusing because for a lot of these kids, like for myself, I was sexually confused. I was very heterosexual, but because I had this delusion that I was meant to be a man, I was thinking of myself as a gay man. And so I was like
Mm.
masturbating to gay male porn every single day. I mean, that destroys your concept of reality when you're fantasizing and yearning, and it creates this sort of unrequited love situation, which is like you're heartbroken over the fact that you will never actually have the body that you want, and you'll never be able to love the people that you want or be loved by those people. I mean, it's like just endless heartbreak, which we all is extremely damaging. But then on top of that, it's obviously showing some really extreme violence that's damaging for both males and females, and it's not good for anyone to be seeing that violence. They don't understand that it's a fantasy, or they don't understand the difference between a healthy relationship and a violent,
Yeah.
abusive fantasy. So yeah, it's really sad. I know a lot of my younger detransition friends have seen it from around 9 to 11. I'm a little older, so I saw it probably around 12 or 13. And then from the age of 13 on, I was watching it every single day. And again, it just encouraged this unobtainable fantasy and these unrealistic body image standards and relationship standards that were never going to come true.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for your vulnerability, because I think a lot of people, when they think of porn, especially, they just think of boys using it. Or obviously, we know that women use it too, but they use it at a lower percentage, but it's there. And so if we have daughters, still, we need to be paying attention to stuff like that, making sure it's not on the devices, talking to them about it, and having these healthy conversations about, what's normal, what's not, and if somebody does expose them to that. Laura, last question before I let you go. If you could encourage somebody to speak out on this issue, obviously, I do a lot of stuff in the pro-life world, and that is deemed a very controversial topic to many. I don't think it's controversial to fight for life, but it's normal for me to get this like hate and people who disagree with me, but it's not comfortable for people to always speak out about their beliefs, whether it's like, hey, we shouldn't let kids transition, or whether it is on the life issue, whether it's on any topic this day and age that people see as controversial. Obviously, everything's racist these days, the DEI stuff. If you could give somebody one piece of advice to speak out on something that's uncomfortable, what would that be?
I would say that it's not just about beliefs, it's about what your values are. Like, if you're a person who claims to love Christ, or you're a person who claims to love truth, or wisdom, or healthiness, or courage, or bravery, then you have to live those values. And when you're speaking out with your values, when you're on the side of truth, and you're on the side of, even if you get hate for it, if you're speaking truth and acting and living with truth, then you are shielded from the worst thing of all, which is your own shame and guilt and self-loathing, because you know that you're not doing the right thing. So speaking on the
Yeah.
side of truth, living with truth, and being courageous, and really valuing, faith, really, a faith to speak and be brave, even though you're very terrified and you have doubts about it. If you claim to be a faith-based person, you especially need to harness that strength from faith and become outspoken about what you value.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, that's so good. Laura, thank you so much for your vulnerability, your time today, and being willing to talk about this. Obviously, there are kids as we speak who are being exposed to things like this. And I hope that even if we help one person through this podcast, that it can absolutely make a difference. But I know that you sharing your story has been something that probably was a process for you. You know, you've been through a lot. And I want to thank you so much as a parent for being vulnerable with us.
Well, thank you so much, Christine. I appreciate you having me on. And anyone out there that's listening, please reach out to me. I really have no judgment. You can sound very down to earth. I consult with parents that are detransitioners or just anyone in the community that wants to learn how to deal with this issue. So please reach out to me and start speaking your truth, or the truth, not just your truth, the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so where can everybody find you then? And your book, you did mention a book that's coming out this
Mhm.
year. Tell us where they can find you and where they'll be able to find the book when it's out.
So you can look me up. I hang out on X a lot, Laura Becker Real, or you can contact me at laurabecker.org. Just email me on there and I'll get back to you shortly. The book will be coming out later this year. It'll be released on Amazon and I'll be promoting that all. So follow me on X, reach out on email. I'm on Instagram. Just look up Laura Becker. You'll be able to find me, and hopefully we can start doing some good work in your local community.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining, Laura.
Thank you.